Good afternoon. I would like to call to order the regular monthly meeting of the Parks and Recreation Commission for October 27th, 2021. Ms. Navarez, may I have the roll call, please?
Chair McGill.
Here.
Vice Chair Clark.
Here.
Commissioner Feck. Commissioner Lesnar Buxton.
You.
Commissioner Longstreet.
Here.
Okay, and that's it, yes. And do we have any changes to the agenda?
Chair McGill, we do not.
Okay, thank you very much. And written communications other than those for agenda items? Ms. Navarez, any written communications?
We did not receive any other written communications for items not on this agenda.
Okay, excuse me, Ms. LeBlanc, thank you very much. Public comment, X agenda items. I think we should have a slide for that, should we not?
One moment, please, sorry.
Sure. Okay, public comment. Any member of the public may address the commission for up to 2 minutes on any subject within the jurisdiction of the commission that is not scheduled for a public discussion before the commission. The total amount of time for public comments will be 15 minutes. Do we have any raised hands?
Chair Clark, we don't have any raised hands, but let me read the instructions just in case. For those who wish to speak during public comment, please use the raise your hand functionality in the GoToWebinar control panel. We are currently displaying a graphic showing where that is located. When I call on you, please unmute yourself and then speak for a maximum of 2 minutes. For those who wish to speak on an agenda item later in the meeting, please raise your hand when the item is under discussion. And we still have no raised hands.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. And then that moves us to our Youth Council report. And we do have someone here with us today. I believe it's Julia Miner. Ms. Miner, the floor is yours.
Hey, hello. All right, thank you so much. So I, once again, am Julia Miner, the chair of the Santa Barbara Youth Council, and I will just be giving a little bit of a update on what the Youth Council has been up to and what we are currently doing. So this year, one thing that we did was we assisted with the child passenger safety seat checkup event at the Franklin Neighborhood Center. This was in partnership with California Highway Patrol and Franklin Neighborhood Center Parks and Recreation, Safe Kids of Santa Barbara County, County of Santa Barbara EMS Agency, and Cottage Children's Medical Center. There were 17 families / participants that arrived and went through a 15 to 20-minute on-site training on proper installation for car seats. About 60% of these parents had car seats that were improperly installed or broken or recalled. Santa Barbara Youth Council is happy to offer support in ensuring that car seats are safely installed and are not expired. Due to ongoing COVID-19 restrictions, we are pivoting to have 3 car seat safety events this year with 2 more. One in November 20th, and then May 21st, 2021. I guess that's the next year, but yeah. And what we are up to is right now we are partnered with PAL, so Police Activities League, and we are putting together with them the Trunk or Treat, which will actually be this Friday from 5 to 8 p.m. And basically, it's just a way to offer families a safe way to socially distance while also do trick-or-treating. So it's targeted towards families and young children. This will also be an outdoor event, although we will be strongly encouraging people to be wearing masks. And so, yeah, we're really excited about that. That's this Friday. And then, that's basically the next thing that we have planned. And we're going to from there, hopefully do some more events with some other people or organizations and partner with them. But I just wanted to give you guys kind of like what we are like doing in the next week or so. And we'll hopefully talk to you guys soon. Do you guys have any questions for me at this time? Yeah?
Where is the trunk or treat?
Oh, I believe it's at Franklin. I have it written down. Oh, the Spencer Adams parking lot on West Victoria Street between
Yeah.
Chapala
Yeah.
and Victoria Street.
And you said
Correct.
and you also you partnered, you said, with Cottage for the car seat. What are you,
Yes.
do you remember the name of the nurse that you worked with? It was Molly Hawkins?
I was not there for that event, so I cannot speak on that,
Okay.
unfortunately.
And thanks for everything you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate your, Commissioner Longstreet.
Oh, I was just going to say that I really think it's important, the car seat activities. Thank you. That helps so many families. And I think nowadays, people are using those car seats longer and they shouldn't, and it's just great. Thanks. Thank the whole youth council for that.
Yeah, appreciate that too. So I had actually a question on the car seats, which is, you referenced 17 families, 60% of which had issues. What do you think, do you have any thoughts on how you broaden participation beyond 17 families?
So I don't know the actual like way of how they marketed it, but that's really the biggest thing is we need to get to a larger group. So, I mean, obviously social media, but that might not even be the best way to do it because probably, especially if we're, targeting people that probably maybe lower income that don't know how to do it, or even just normal, like everyone, like social media might not be the best because that's more for kids and not for adults. Well, I mean, adults have that. Okay. I'm not explaining myself very well. My parents
I
both
understand.
have.
Yeah.
But I would probably do Facebook, and I have to think about that more. Like what's the biggest place? You guys would probably know this better than I would actually. Where's the biggest place? I mean, it's probably going to be somewhere online that we could market.
Well, but
to-
also through pediatricians' offices, the West Side
Yeah,
Neighborhood Clinic, the different Franklin Clinic flyers. I
And I'd
think
say
it's a
posters.
good way to reach.
Yeah, and posters at the libraries, yeah, particularly Franklin.
Mhm.
Head Start programs.
Yeah, so we'll look into that because I agree. I think that, I mean, obviously that was a great start, but I just don't know how logically to like start getting like pediatricians in places to start like mentioning that. I don't know the procedure of that. I don't know if you guys have any ideas on that.
I definitely think one of my colleagues, Molly Hawkins, is head of like injury prevention education in trauma prevention at Cottage. She does a lot with car seats and helmets. So I could email you her contact information, or you could call Cottage for it.
Yeah, that'd be great if you could.
Because she would have ideas on how to reach out for sure.
Mhm. Do you have my email?
I can get it from
We can get
it.
Rose.
Yes, Chair Clark, I'll make sure and send that to you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Good conversation. So with that, Ms. Minor, thank you very much. And that brings us to the next item, which is the Commissioner Committee assignment reports. I'm just going to go from right to left across my little gallery of pictures. And I will start with Commissioner Lesnar Buxton. Jacob.
I was able to attend the youth council, and they're doing incredible things, and I cannot add to Ms. Minor's report. She covered it all.
Great. Yeah, that was a great report. Thanks. Vice Chair Clark.
Hey, last month, October this month, I attended the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting. We will be discussing all those agenda items. I went to a public workshop update discussion of the East Side Neighborhood Park, which was fantastic and well attended. And I went to the Park Foundation Board meeting last week where we talked, among other things, the band shell renovation and our normal monthly financials. And we talked about our annual appeal, and that's it.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Longstreet.
I don't have anything to report this month.
Well, that's unusual. Okay.
I did go on a vacation.
Oh, well, that's important.
That's recreation.
Yes. As for me, we're going to sound like we're joined at the hip, but I also went to the East Side Park workshop, but you went to the Thursday and I went to the Saturday. And I would say the Saturday was less well attended, but really good positive feedback and interaction. Also attended an integrated pest management special meeting where and you were there too. Yeah, a real, aside from always learning something at these meetings about pest control in the city, I think it was an important meeting for me because there was really a lot of conversation about what the day in the life of a parks employee is and what parks employees need to be doing on a constant basis to prioritize their very limited time and resources. And I'd say for me as an agenda item, as we go into the budget cycle, I think it would be really good to really almost have a day in the life type presentation on what these guys are doing every day and how they have to prioritize. And I learned a lot about gophers. But that was the important takeaway for me was really what their day looks like and where they can and cannot go because of that. And then I was also at the Park Foundation, and that's been covered by Vice Chair Clark. All right. And with that, that takes us to commission and staff communications. Ms. LeBlanc.
I have nothing to report this month.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Which then takes us to, I believe that takes us to ceremonial items and service awards.
Yes, and I am pleased to have 3 people in our department to talk about this month. 2 employees were recognized at the September 14th council meeting. Both of those employees have 15 years of service with the city of Santa Barbara. The first employee I want to recognize is John Velasco. He is one of our park rangers. He's one of just 3 park rangers that we have who's in our parks day in, day out, year round, making sure that they're safe for our community. He works closely with staff from all over our department, our weekend and evening crews, community members, and police department staff. I also would like to recognize Artemio Aranda. He is a senior grounds maintenance worker, also with 15 years of service. Artemio started his career as a part-time employee in the Parks Department and has worked his way up into the senior grounds maintenance worker position that he's in now. So he works with the beach crew, which provides services to a huge array of parks in the waterfront and also on the Mesa, including Shoreline, Chase Palm Park, Cabrillo Ball Field, and La Mesa. But he's, with the tenure that he's got, he's worked in all of our parks, and he's really a great team member for the whole parks division. I'd also like to recognize one employee who was recognized at the October 5th council meeting with 20 years of service, and that's Ramon Perez. He's a custodian, and he provides kind of invaluable services to all community members by making sure that park restrooms are clean and functional day in, day out. He works heavily with our evening and weekend crews as well, and he's always willing to pitch in and is a really hardworking, dependable member of our team.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and congratulations go out to all three of you. I mean, we talk about this at length, but you are the people that make it all happen. We don't see your faces every day, but I'm out in the parks every day, so I do see your faces and have conversations as much as possible. And I see how people like you are interacting with the public. And you not only have the regular action, but you also are ambassadors for Parks and Recreation and in the way you interact with people. And I just want to say thank you very much for 50 years of combined service. No, 60 years of, 50, my math isn't so good these days. 50 years of combined service and keeping things moving and keeping things moving forward. So thank you for that. Does anybody else would like to say anything before we move on? Yep. Okay. With that, we'll go to the summary of council actions. And does anybody have any questions or comments about the summary of council actions? No? Okay. And then approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of September 22nd, 2021. Do we have a motion for to waive the reading and approve the meetings?
So moved.
Minutes. Yep.
Second.
Okay, great. So we have a motion and a second. And all in favor? Any discussion, first of all?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. And that takes us to the street tree advisory items. And we have Mr. Slack joining us, I believe, from vacation in Arizona. Is that right?
That is correct. Good afternoon, Chair McGill and commissioners. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide, please. The first street tree advisory committee recommendation for review is the request to remove a total of 35 trees from the property located at 119 East Coda Street. It's the corner of Coda and the 600 block of Santa Barbara. The application is requesting the removal of 23 Tippewanas, 9 coast live oaks, and 3 southern live oaks. As part of the proposed improvements of the project, there are a total of 44 trees being replaced. This is the potential future site of the new Santa Barbara Police Station. The applicant for this project is the City of Santa Barbara Public Works. As consistent with other projects, when the city is building new things, we've asked Principal Project Manager Brad Hess to come onto the presentation and speak a few minutes and give a little bit of background regarding the project. And once that's done, we'll jump back into the tree components. So Brad, feel free to join us.
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and Mr. Slack. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me this afternoon. And I'm sure that most of you know generally what's been going on, but I thought I'd take this opportunity to just bring you up to speed on this project and basically what's been happening over the last 3.5 years that brings us to this point today. The existing police station was built in 1959 for 85 officers. And today there are 212 sworn and unsworn officers that work out of 4 different locations. There have been multiple efforts since the 80s, really, to relocate and build a new police station, but for multiple reasons, these efforts just never happened. In November of 2017, as you know, Measure C passed, so that created a funding source for this project. I was brought on and hired in early 2018 to oversee this project, and we then hired a design team to begin the programming. Programming is basically what you do to determine how big the project needs to be, what exactly is needed for the station and for the department. We have 2 architects One is a local architect. It's Cornell Collective, Brian Cornell being the primary name recognition. And we have a technical architect, MWL, McLaren, Wilson, and Lowry. And Jim McLaren is the principal that's working with us. And he's built over 300 police stations nationally. So he truly is the national expert. And we feel very privileged to have him on our team. So that's our design team. MWL oversaw all of the programming, doing interviews and surveys to determine what the site criteria needed to be. So that was completed. And we went into the site selection process and we analyzed 20 possible sites throughout Santa Barbara, starting with the properties that we own. We ended up doing a deep study of 5 of those locations. We narrowed those 5 down to 2, one being the Coda Commuter Parking Lot that we're talking about today, and the Louise Lowry Davis Center on Victoria and Chapala. So of these 2, the Coda lot was selected, as you know, by City Council as the preferred site alternative to study for the preliminary environmental review. And that was conducted over the past 2 years, doing multiple studies as part of the CEQA process. 30% drawings have been completed, which basically are schematic drawings. The DART, or Development Application Review Team, application was submitted and actually resubmitted. And we're in the process of waiting for that application to be deemed complete, which we expect, keep fingers crossed, hopefully next week. So the project is a building and a parking structure, both of which are 3 stories above ground and 1 basement level. The building and parking structure are a system. They're not just 2 independent buildings that are side by side. They actually are integrated and create a system that matches the floor-to-floor elevations of each for multiple uses and for efficiency. The project will consolidate all of the police department, which again they're operating out of 4 locations, as I said, but bringing them all into 1 location, which will total about 65,000 square feet, and will provide a secure parking structure for both the fleet and personal vehicles, which will have a solar array and a shooting range in the basement. So we're here today because the Coda lot, as you know, and as Mr. Slack explained, has many trees. And in order to put the police station there, we need to remove the majority of them. We'll be retaining as many as we can, primarily on the western side where the Antioch building is, as well as many on the north side as we can. But the majority will be removed. So we do have a mitigation plan for this. And but with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Mr. Slack to explain the details. And thank you again for having me, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. So Chair McGill and commissioners, just to recap, the project applicant is requesting the removal of 35 total trees. That's 23 Tipuanas, which actually are primarily scattered throughout the parking lot, the shade trees that are in the dominant shade tree in the parking lot currently. 9 coast live oaks, which kind of skirt the planter around the parking lot, and then 3 southern live oaks that are in there with the coast live oaks. As Brad indicated, there was a pretty comprehensive environmental review, not just of the trees, but speaking directly about the tree component. The environmental consultant looked really critically at the existing trees, the long-term potential of those trees, and what would be required in order to offset the loss in biomass of the trees on site. So there's a total of 44 trees on site, and as Brad indicated, they've made several attempts to try to retain as many as possible. So the current plan is to retain 9 Tipuana tipu trees that skirt the perimeter, as Brad said, as Mr. Hess said, where along the Antioch building and then along the apartment complex, I believe is what it is. So there's some semi-mature Tipuanas that skirt the outer edge of the parking lot that is being proposed for retention. In addition to that, there's the plan to plant 44 new trees. 14 of those are being proposed on site. Some of those are visible in the site plan around the building and along the parking lot. There's also going to be 20 new palm trees proposed for replacement. Those trees are not really not part of the environmental review component that we're talking about currently, but there's 14 new shade trees planted on site and an additional 16 palm trees with another 4 that are proposed for planting within the public right-of-way as street trees. So when the consultant was looking at the loss in biomass, basically a software was used to categorize, essentially small, medium, and large trees. And of those trees, Tipuana was a large tree, Coast Live Oak's a large tree, and Southern Live Oak, actually, they all sort of fit that categorical large shade tree type of qualification. So in order to offset the loss in biomass, the plan was to plant an equivalent amount of trees plus 25%. So essentially just over a 1-to-1 replacement ratio. So there's still some unknown in terms of replacement strategies. The oak trees will be mitigated through planting most likely at water tank sites. I think Gibraltar was one of the ones mentioned. Anytime that there's Coast Live Oak trees mitigated, they prefer to see them planted in, at least pseudo-natural or naturalized sites. So that seems like a very viable option. Again, there's 14 trees that are being proposed for replacement on the site as well. And then all of the remaining trees that will be planted as mitigation for this project will be street tree locations that we determine. And we'll determine those locations based on the size of trees. So essentially, to not get super complicated, we'll be looking to find really good spots to plant really big trees as part of this mitigation strategy. So again, the committee reviewed the project in full scope. I think there was general consensus during discussion that the proposed mitigation strategy made good sense. There were some comments about the incorporation of shade trees on site. Mr. Hess provided some comments. I think there's significant limitations in regards to what's being proposed on the location. During ABR review at the concept level, there were comments made about the use of palm trees and how that vertical height can also help to break up the facade as well. But the committee did make comments about they would like to see more shade tree incorporation. I'm not sure that that's super possible right here. And after review, the committee made a motion to approve the removal as proposed with the provided mitigation strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Slack. Does anybody have any questions for either Mr. Slack or Mr. Hess? I have one if nobody else has any. Okay, then I will go. So the one thing I did just flag, I noticed the 1.25 to 1 ratio and projects that we've been looking at most recently seem like they have more like 2 to 1. I mean, we've been looking at much higher replacement ratios. It seems like certainly my recollection. Was there any conversation about that? About why settle on that ratio?
Chair McGill and commissioners, I think that when we looked at the mitigation strategy, I think our target is typically 1 to 1. The general plan reference is 1 to 1. I think that in this specific situation, it can be challenging to find, say, street tree locations or off-site locations for mitigation ratios and replacement planting. So I think in this specific instance, the 1.25 or the 1 to 1 with sort of the 25% additional component, there was very little discussion at the committee level. I think that there was consensus that it was adequate for what was being proposed. And again, just to kind of go back, the environmental study sort of looked at that sort of maximum potential biomass of each tree on site, and the goal was to replace that at that 1 to 1, sort of plus 25% ratio, so that in essence, with long-term tree development, we would be offsetting all biomass lost on site, plus those additional trees. I'm not sure if that specifically answers your question or not.
Yeah, yeah, I'll take it. Um, Okay, if there are no other questions, I will open it up for public comment. Ms. Navarez, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Anyone who would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand in the GoToWebinar control panel. Chair McGill, there are no hands raised.
Okay, thanks so much. All right.
I would make a motion.
Okay,
The one thing I was going to add to my motion, although I don't think it's particularly necessary with a city project, but just to make sure that trees are not cut until construction begins.
Yeah.
You know, that we don't get ahead of ourselves and end up with a bare parking lot at some point. But I would move to concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for the removal at Coda Street at the 119 East Coda and the 600 block of Santa Barbara Street of 23 Tippewana Tippus and 9 Coast Live Oaks and 3 Southern Live Oaks. And that after review of the project, it is determined that the project was a reasonable development of the property and the proposed removals and mitigation ratios were justified. Does that cover all the bases, Mr. Slack? And and that the removals do not take place till construction begins.
I can second that.
okay. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
I would just add that I am really happy to see this project move forward finally. This is for the entire community. I mean, we are all going to be in trouble if something happens and our police station goes down. It is not a political thing. It is this public safety.
All right. So if there's no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so we have 3 in favor, 1 opposed, and it's Commissioner Lesnar Buxton. And so moved. And then we will move on to the pine trees at 226 Oliver Road.
Excuse me, Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is a request to remove 2 Italian stone pines located within the front setback of the property at 226 Oliver Road. These trees actually are located on the side of the property, but as we know that when a property exists on the corner, anytime it fronts a street, it has a front setback, so that front setback would apply in this specific location as well. The applicant's requesting the removal of the 2 stone pines, stating that they've outgrown their space and that they've caused damage to both the sidewalk and the road. The committee reviewed the application, discussed the trees, noted that the trees were in good health, had probably not been pruned much, if ever, over the last several years. Did note that they were planted very close together and also that the trees were relatively young considering the species. There was quite a bit of discussion about the sidewalk being displaced, the possibility of the sidewalk being able to be repaired. It's something that we've seen quite often and had lots of discussion about even at the commission level. And I think, you know, when we look at this tree removal request and then, you know, moving forward, each individual request is sort of unique. And we're fortunate to have some really talented arborists on the committee that have lots of good, intimate experience with lots of trees in town and throughout the county and understand that some trees respond differently to things and some trees can get much larger and that sort of thing. So oftentimes when we look at hardscape disruption, those can be repaired without causing long-term detrimental damage to the tree, which oftentimes does not require removal. In this specific instance, during discussion, several of the committee members noted that the trees were very close to the sidewalk. Stone pine, as we know from our, you know, historic stone pines on Anapamu, can get to extremely large sizes and do have a propensity for disrupting the hardscape. And during review, there was general consensus amongst the arborists on the committee that this problem would only get worse, and it would continue to get worse and only continue to get worse and worse over time. And that removal made practical sense given that knowledge of the way the tree was going to respond and also its close proximity to the sidewalk, which does differ from a lot of reviews and one that we'll review just a couple minutes later here. The committee talked about the possibility of replacing trees. There's open parkway both on the side of the property and also in the front of the property on Oliver Road. And they did note during discussion that those may be good, suitable locations for replacement trees. And after review, the committee made a recommendation to approve the 2 removals of the Italian stone pines located within the front setback of the property, noting that those replacement, they made a recommendation to approve the removal of the 2 Italian stone pines on the condition that 2 new trees be planted on property, and made comments that those trees could also be street trees. And there was a height requirement of, 30 feet in height at maturity. So it's somewhat unique in this recommendation. They didn't condition trees to necessarily be street trees or setback trees. They provided some latitude. There's not a lot of planting opportunity on the parcel itself, and that's where the discussion really kind of moved down towards the planting of street trees in lieu of planting trees on the property. So they technically could do 2 street trees or 2 setback trees, or they could opt to plant 1 street tree or 1 setback tree, depending on the decision of the commission. And during that review, they made the determination the commission can make the finding that the principles of good forest management would be best served by the proposed removals.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Slack. Does anybody have any questions?
It's not a question, but I just think since I was our liaison to the Street Tree Advisory Committee and I was there during the discussion, I'd like to add to Mr. Slack's his presentation is that I had the question when I was there. This frequently comes up on our agendas. We see street trees affecting hardscape, and we say, well, we don't remove trees for hardscape. Hardscape is fixable. And I just want to reinforce here that I asked the question. I said, how come you guys are making this decision in this case when usually we see trees affecting hardscape, we won't take them out? And almost unanimously, they said, then other situations, mitigation is easy and possible, like the possibility of success is there. And in this situation, because of the nature of stone pines and the placement, the possibility of mitigation it's not going to be successful. There's no possibility of that. So I just wanted to add that part of the discussion because I think we need to hear it.
So can I ask just a clarifying question on the mitigation is not possible? And I'm really thinking back to some of the really large trees with massive hardscape disruption we've looked at on the west side, and I'm thinking about Gillespie in particular.
So it's something to do with where the crown of the tree was.
And so that's my question is, when we talk about mitigation is not possible, is it mitigation is not possible without continually having to fix the sidewalk, or is it that it's going to do irreparable damage to the tree? Or I think that's an important distinction for me, because if it's just the sidewalk, there is a consistency issue for me.
Chair McGill and commissioners, you brought up several good points, and those were parts of the discussion. I think that when we look at sidewalk disruption, whether it be a street tree or a setback tree, age is a really important factor in these decisions, as well as the placement. So in this case, these trees are relatively young. They have the potential to get, significantly larger. And then as Commissioner Clark noted during discussion, there was comments made regarding the proximity of the tree to the sidewalk. As the tree continues to develop, that trunk only gets bigger and the root flare kind of gets bigger, and it's going to continue to cause significant disruption over time as those roots and that trunk increases in girth or diameter. And the long-term damage and the need for probably what would be relatively frequent repairs to the hardscape and root pruning would be long-term detrimental to the trees. And that was the general consensus amongst the committee members. So
Okay.
in some cases, just to clarify, and we brought up a really good example with Gillespie, that tree has been in the ground for potentially 80, maybe even 100 years. And it's really not going to see a lot of growth in that root flare area anymore. A lot of that stuff starts to lignify and harden, and it really doesn't get bigger. Whereas with a younger tree, that through that developmental process, you do start to see those changes continue to happen. And it was that long-term development of both of these trees that the committee made the decision that it made practical sense to approve the removal or recommend approval of the removal.
Okay, thank you. That helps, thanks. Before I open for public comment, do we have any other questions? Okay. Ms. Navarez, do we have anybody from the public that wants to speak on this item?
Chair McGill, there are no hands raised.
Okay. With that, do we have any further discussion or questions?
I just had one question for Mr. Slack. The person that was opposed to the removal was Ms. Tremont, and I can't remember what her reasoning was. Do you offhand recollect?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Clark, it was Ms. Tremont's opinion that the trees could be retained and that root pruning was a feasible option in her opinion.
All right.
I would make a motion. I would concur that we agree with the Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for the removal of the Italian stone pines at 226 Oliver Road, on the condition that they be replaced with 2 trees that will be determined with the city arborist as to parkway or setback tree, and that this meets the goals of good forest management.
I can second that.
Oh, okay. No. No, the only thing I was going to add was the 30 feet in height, but that's
Yeah, the 30 feet in height.
But
I agree to that.
We'll take Ms. Clark's second. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so moved, which brings us to St. Andrews Street.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the next Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove the Canary Island pine located within the front setback of the property at 1027 San Andreas Street. On the application, there were a few different reasons listed for removal. Debris accumulation was one. An extension of that was loss of debris impacting the sidewalk and the property. And most of the reasons listed on the request were due to fire-related concerns, in addition to the debris, the accumulation of needles throughout the canopy and the property, and the mention of the recent fire on the hillside there, as well as really kind of coaxing the concern of the property owner in terms of the trees' potential flammability. And the committee reviewed the request, had a pretty good discussion regarding the reasons listed on the application for removal. The committee members were in general agreement that this tree was not necessarily a fire hazard, and also provided comments that if the tree was maintained more frequently, debris accumulation would not be nearly as much of an issue. There was reference to some Canary Island pines further up the street that appear to be pruned a little bit more frequently. Canopy is a little bit more opened, and a lot of that needle buildup that does occur within the canopy as the tree continues to grow and produce new needles, and those older needles start to add size and fall out of the tree, could have a really profound impact in reducing general debris accumulation both throughout the canopy of the tree and on the property itself. There was, after review, the committee made the recommendation to deny the request for removal of the Canary Island pine at 1027 San Andres Street.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
I was just wondering, Mr. Slack, it seems like the request is based on fear. You know, if you read the applicant's letter and you read the history that they've lost a house before, in the recent spate of fires along the freeways and hillsides, so probably very scary for this individual. Did you have a chance to talk to them and after the Street Tree Advisory Committee decision and explain how increased maintenance and pruning would decrease risk and help kind of let them feel a little bit less scared?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Clark, I've not had communications with the applicant since the Street Tree Advisory Committee meeting. We do follow up with them post the commission meeting, so we'll make sure to have that conversation with them.
Okay, thanks.
I noticed, I mean, the application references the tree being dry and a fire risk because it's dry. I mean, it looked like a normal pine to me. Can you speak to that? Is there any different or unusual risk due to it being parched?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, I think the appearance of the tree and some of the comments from the applicant has to do with probably just the reduced maintenance frequency. So pine trees are similar to shade trees in that leaves or needles grow and then they'll drop older leaves or needles as the tree continues through its normal growth cycle. A lot of the brown, essentially the brown needles that you're seeing in the canopy, we would consider like secondary needle drop. Sometimes those needles fall off the tree, sometimes they retain for long periods of time. It's a pretty natural cycle. And with some of the committee's discussion and comments regarding maintenance, a lot of that would be resolved through the pruning. So the general denseness of that canopy is going to retain lots of those needles, whether they're still actually attached or they've detached and would have normally fallen down to the ground. So I wouldn't say the tree is like dry or that there's even a water need. It appears to be in fantastic health. What you're seeing is really just an accumulation of debris in the canopy as a result of very infrequent maintenance.
And is that, then I would assume, is what's impacting the level of debris that's on the roof, which I would guess would be concerning as well. The roof tiles building, yeah.
Yeah, Chair McGill and Commissioners, that's correct. You could really just chalk what you've seen during the site visit due to deferred maintenance kind of throughout the canopy of the tree as well as on the roof. You know, you've got a really big tree over a property and you're going to have to do a little bit of roof maintenance if you want to, you know, keep the needles or the leaves, you know, off of your roof when you have a tree that's close to the property like that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions for Mr. Slack? If not, can we see if there's any member of the public that wishes to speak on this agenda item?
Chair McGill, there are no hands raised.
Okay, thank you very much. Any discussion, any further discussion or questions? Okay, if that's the case, then I'll go ahead and make a motion that we deny the following setback tree removal request for 1027 San Andres Street, Apartment 1 for the Canary Island pine, and that there are no findings pursuant to 1524-090 that satisfy the request.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Lester Buxton. Do we have any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? So moved. And that brings us to our last tree, which is 1915 Red Rose Way.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, the last Street Tree Advisory Committee recommendation for review is the request to remove a red flowering gum located within the front setback of the property at 1915 Red Rose Way. There were a couple different reasons listed on the application for removal: sewer line blockage of the private sewer lateral, as well as sidewalk damage and just general concerns regarding root development in the tree. The applicant did state that they were concerned with the previous sewer line blockage, long-term maintenance concerns with that, as well as plans to repair the driveway and root issues related to driveway repair. The committee reviewed the application, discussed the tree, noted it's been very well maintained, it's in really good health. This is a really good example of a tree that's much later in life than the stone pines that we looked at on Oliver Road. There was general agreement through the discussion that the committee had that root pruning in this situation was a feasible option that would not lead to long-term detrimental damage to the tree. This tree, as previously referenced, is much older. The root system is much more developed. The root flare is quite a bit further away from the sidewalk than the stone pines on Oliver. And again, there was general agreement that root pruning was a feasible strategy in this situation. The applicant was present during the Street Tree Advisory Committee review, provided some additional information regarding sewer line issues. There was really no definitive evidence to suggest that the tree prevents sewer lateral repair. Similar to street tree review with sewer laterals, lots of times the sewer lateral can be completely fixed or repaired without causing the need for tree removal. And the damage with the driveway itself, there really wasn't any significant or even really visible damage to the driveway itself. And after review, the committee made a recommendation to deny the request for the removal of the red flowering gum at 1915 Red Rose Way.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? Do you know, by chance, Mr. Slack, how recent that sidewalk repair, the ramping sidewalk repair is? I'm just kind of trying to get a feel for how, what's the rate of uplift, I guess is the way I'm trying to ask the question.
Chair McGill and Commissioners, I don't have really detailed information regarding when that site was repaired. I can say that the asphalt padding that was done it doesn't look very old, so I would say it was done somewhat recently. Again, not having like detailed information regarding that. The sidewalk itself looks pretty old to me. I don't think that it based on its appearance, it looks like it's been replaced at least in the very near future, or in the past, I should say. So I really think that this may be an example where this is the first and only disruption present. It may have persisted a while before it was padded with asphalt, but I don't think that this is something that's been super problematic. And I think that if there was, judicious root pruning done and the sidewalk was fixed, that we would expect to see problems again in the immediate future.
Okay. How old is this tree, would you guess? I'm really trying to get, is it full grown?
Chair McGill and Commissioners, I always struggle to wager a guess on something's age unless you can sort of reference it to like a photo or a planting date or the actual property. I would say it's towards maturity. Red flowering gum is a tough tree because there's so much variation within it as a species. You see some on Kino that are like 6 feet in diameter, and then there's some around town that may be of equivalent age and they're much smaller. So it's really difficult to estimate its age. But I would say it's safe to say that it's on the mature end of the spectrum.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody else have any questions? All right. If not, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on this agenda item?
Chair McGill, there are no hands raised.
Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion?
I have a question. There were a couple of trees down from there that seemed to be struggling. You'd mentioned maybe to look at some trees to the east. Were the eucalyptus that seemed to have a lot of dieback and clumping, something happening at the ends of the branches? Did you notice those?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Longstreet. I'd never seen them before
Okay.
in my life prior to being out there and looking at the, the subject tree. So it's kind of tough to say. I think that we don't really know a lot about those particular trees. So some of it may just be natural appearance. The flowers and the flowers turn into fruit, and those are like in the shape of what's referred to as like a panicle. So you do get like a clumping of the fruit, and that makes it have like a very kind of dry, dead appearance. I would say they're in fair shape. I don't, have a lot of intimate knowledge about that particular species of tree.
Okay, thank you. This tree is quite a beautiful specimen tree in front of this building and really does serve a purpose in the neighborhood. So do you want me to make a motion?
Sure, if you're ready.
Sure. I will move that we concur with the Street Tree Advisory Committee's recommendation to deny the removal of the red flowering gum at 1915 Red Rose Way.
Second.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. And that finishes the street trees. And thank you very much, Mr. Slack. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. All right, so that now brings us to the director's report.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Come on.
Chair
Yes.
McGill, thank you. I am subbing in for Jill today. I have a couple of items for you on the director's report. I'd like to present some positive news about the Arts and Crafts Show. So just like many other activities, the show was suspended from March through October last year in response to pandemic and local public health restrictions. We were able to reopen the show using an online space reservation system for show members, and we're pleased to report that show participation has been steadily climbing back towards pre-pandemic levels. We're not quite there yet, but we're doing much better than we were with 135 active members. We were able to begin collecting fees again from the members last month. And I'd also like to report on 3 infrastructure projects that our department has been working on. The first is to repair the Oak Park dance floor. The floor is in a state of serious deterioration, so we've been working with Public Works Facilities to come up with a plan to rehab the floor. We are developing the plan now and are working to time maintenance there early in the next calendar year so we can minimize the impact on the many users of that dance floor. And we also recently presented renovation plans for the Plaza Del Mar bandshell to the Historic Landmarks Commission. Feedback from the plans were positive, and we anticipate that we will have final design approval next month. We're still working to secure funding for that project. And we're working with the Park Foundation to secure grants. So if funding is secured, we should be able to begin construction as early as this spring. And then finally, we also presented repairs to the 1,000 Steps to the Historic Landmarks Commission earlier this month. HLC also approved those plans. They approved final design. So we anticipate that we will be through the permitting process and ready to begin construction as early as February. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Do we have any questions for Ms. LeBlanc?
No questions, but congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the Oak Park dance floor rehab because I like to go out there sometimes. Contra dancers used to go out there, and it'd be a great place to start celebrating life again with the ability to gather in groups and dance. And same with the Plaza Del Mar Bandshell. Those are both really exciting opportunities for this community.
And it'll be nice to have 1,000 Steps safe again.
Absolutely. Our project management team has been working really hard on all of these projects, and Jill.
Yeah. So the Oak Park dance floor, is it actually closed now, or is it still open?
It's not closed now. We're trying to it is usable, but it's, you know, kind of rapidly deteriorating. So we're aiming to get that construction window kind of narrowed down so it's closed for a really short amount of time if possible.
Great. Okay, thanks. And I guess, you know, there's the next agenda item is the Arts and Crafts Show. So I think if there's any questions on that, we could just lump it all together into item 6, unless anybody has any specific questions now.
No, and I'll just say that Rich Hanna, our recreation manager, is going to jump on first to begin that presentation for the Santa Barbara Arts and Crafts Show. And then Jason Bryan will continue the presentation after that.
Okay, so why don't we then go ahead and move on to old business and item 6.
So good afternoon, good evening, Chair McGill and Commissioners. Rich Hanna, Recreation Manager. Before I turn this over to Senior Recreation Supervisor Jason Bryan, I just wanted to share with you some input and some feedback that I've gleaned through this process. And one of the things that we've heard loud and clear is the members' passion for the show and how the show in many cases is the primary source of revenue. And as we've gone through these changes and coming to you tonight with this program update, many of those considerations were applied as we continue to move through this process. I also wanted to just thank, before we get into the presentation, the committee members, the show members, and the staff who have worked really hard on this work effort. We've had over 13 meetings. Some of those are being specifically targeted with the only topic of what you're going to receive this evening. And every other meeting that's a typical regular meeting has had an agenda item focusing on these things as well. And you'll hear more about that in the presentation. And there's more meetings to follow, but I think it would be unfair to say that staff, the committee, and the show members, they've really spent a lot of time working through these issues. And I'm just so happy that it was a collaborative process. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jason Bryan, and I will be available for questions at the end also. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair McGill and Commissioners. I'm happy to provide today's program update on the Santa Barbara Arts and Crafts Show. Next slide, please. Today's presentation will update the Commission on improvements to the Arts and Crafts Show that were introduced in the January Commission meeting. Work with the show has focused on these 5 key areas that you see on the screen: unifying the show, updating procedures and regulations, the committee appointment process, opportunities for other events, and code of conduct. Next slide, please. At the January 27th Commission meeting, staff presented a report on the Arts and Crafts Show and received comments on suggestions for improvements from the Commission members. These were some of the comments and suggestions commissioners made at that January meeting that were used in part for our roadmap on working with the committee through this process. Next slide, please. Following that commission presentation, show organization has been the main focus of those 13 meetings. Staff worked with the committee and show members to receive input and establish recommendations to move forward with changes to improve show operations. Next slide, please. Some show members held the opinion that the 1973 ballot initiative was binding and that any substantial change to the show's administration required a vote of the general Santa Barbara electorate. Assistant City Attorney Daniel Henschke attended the August meeting of the Arts and Crafts Show Advisory Committee and reviewed the city attorney's analysis that mirrored a 1991 review, finding that the ballot initiative was never adopted by the city and that the show is governed by Municipal Code Section 15.08. This chapter of the Municipal Code can be changed through the normal ordinance committee and city council process. And next slide, that will talk about kind of a review of the slide that you saw back in January, where Municipal Code Chapter 15.08 establishes the framework for administering the show. The full text of that municipal code has been included in your packet, as well as the city attorney's office review from 1991. Some changes to the municipal code are expected to be submitted after this policy review process to bring the code up to date. References many old positions, and there are just a couple things that that will need to specifically be addressed. It's notable that that separating the show into separate arts and crafts sections was never specified in the municipal code. That's just been a practice of the show. Next slide, please. Member surveys reflected increased support for the elimination of separate arts and crafts sections. This topic has been reviewed periodically by the committee for decades, but the committee unanimously recommended unification for the first time through this process. The show operated in a blended model since resuming in October of 2020 of last year after a closure due to COVID-19. Staff received positive feedback from most members in both sections on how well the show operated with a blended system. We've also heard from visitors that the show feels full and more vibrant with no gaps in the show line. Several longtime members commented that they had their best year in sales after reopening since the pandemic. Next slide, please. Through this collaborative process, it was proposed that members retain their previously assigned spaces during the transition to an integrated show, and that all members have the opportunity to fill in vacant spaces in the future. The committee approved that the show continue to operate in an integrated model until an updated procedures and regulations can be published. The department has been using an online reservation system called Sign Up Genius, it's a different system, to fill in the show line so that show members know where they will be placed in advance. This is the same system that we used for tennis and pickleball court reservations, as well as lane reservations at Los Baños Pool. Staff anticipates a gradual transition where permanent spaces are slowly being filled in by members based on attendance and seniority without restricting based on what type of art or craft the member creates. Of the 44 front row spaces in the art section, only 5 are anticipated to be reassigned at the January space assignment meeting. And these 5 spaces were members who left the show, who vacated those spaces. So we anticipate a slow attrition from members leaving the show, and we'll use the former systems for attendance and seniority for assigning vacant spaces. And although many of the spaces are assigned on any given Sunday, only 70 to 75% of show members will attend, and that creates open spaces in the show line. And the system of using Sign Up Genius helps us fill in that show line in advance, makes a comfortable system so people know where they're going to be exhibiting. Next slide, please. The group reviewed a number of procedures and regulations for updates, with clear support received for this first item of allowing prints of original artwork. And then we did not receive support for the last 2 that are listed here of allowing Ventura County residents and limited partnerships. The show has not allowed reproductions in the past, with the exception of photography and artwork created entirely through a digital or computerized process. A few members felt that when digital photography was first allowed, it violated the municipal code relating to only allowing individually hand-produced arts and crafts. Purists felt that anything but a chemical development for photography violated this rule. However, chemical development is only used by a handful of photographers today. Most painters, illustrators, and other artists working in traditional mediums have long felt that there was an inequity by allowing reproductions for photographers, but not for others. Most other arts and crafts shows throughout the country allow prints, and I've personally heard from many potential members that did not pursue show membership because of this restriction of not allowing prints of original artwork. The committee is recommending eliminating this restriction by allowing prints of original artwork as long as those prints are produced using the members' own equipment. This is the same requirement that photographers have that's consistent with the show's main tenets that items cannot be produced using commercial production facilities. Staff requested input on other topics, such as allowing Ventura residents, as I mentioned earlier, and partnerships. Neither of those received support and, in fact, strong opposition, so those are no longer being considered. Next slide, please. Through the policy review process, most members resisted changing from elected committee members to commission appointments to ensure the voice of members would determine their representatives. The group agreed with increasing terms from 18 months to 2 years. This is a relatively minor change that's consistent with other advisory groups. There's also a recommendation to maintain the current restriction of committee members serving no more than 2 consecutive terms to provide opportunities for new opinions to be considered at the committee. With the elimination of sections, a new system was needed for the vote of committee members with a balance of representation for functional items and decorative fine arts from the arts and crafts sections that we had before, where we separated the groups into 2 sections. The proposed rule parallels the current system in that 2 of the committee members be elected who primarily produce functional items, crafts. 2 committee members be elected who primarily produce decorative fine arts, while maintaining the commission-appointed member at large who cannot be a show member. This is one of the changes that would be required in Municipal Code Chapter 15.08. Although not part of the rules, the committee approved transitioning from paper ballots to provide an opportunity for electronic voting. And we used this in the election held in August. That election had considerably more participation than elections in previous years. So we are leveraging some technologies that we haven't used before, including electronic voting to increase participation, and the online meetings as well. Next slide, please. There was strong opposition in reducing the number of shows to accommodate other events, but the group supported an approach where multiple events can be supported to increase programming in the waterfront area. As Recreation Manager Rich Hanna stated earlier, the show is a primary source of income for many of its members. Next slide, please. Staff developed an approach for 3 tiers of event coordination based on the size, scope, and complexity of the special event. Specific strategies were discussed with level 3 events requiring significant coordination. The upcoming Santa Barbara Half Marathon would be an example of a level 3 event where we had quite a bit of discussion on what we can do to mitigate the impacts and make the both events successful to be run simultaneously. Next slide, please. The show's policy review will continue to be the main focus of committee members, with the goal of having new rules published by the end of the year, so the January space assignment meeting will allow full integration for permanent assignments. Significant progress has been achieved on several key topics. Code of conduct has been reviewed in ad hoc meetings and is the last major policy area to be brought back to the full committee. The ad hoc recommendations will be reviewed by the committee in November to align the code of conduct enforcement procedure with the rest of the department, while still allowing input from the committee. Staff will continue to work with the committee to continue evaluating outdated show procedures to streamline regulations. And we did that in a few areas already. For instance, the allowing prints. There were areas in the show rules that were very, very specific to outdated and antiquated terms. And that was streamlined to make it more easily understood and easily enforced. So that was a great improvement that was suggested through this process. Next slide, please. We've had quite a few meetings already, and this will continue to be the topic on the next at least 2 meetings. This concludes my presentations, and I would be happy to address any questions.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Mr. Bryan. I would like to open the floor for questions before we take any public comment. Do we have any questions? Okay. Well, I guess I have a couple. I noticed that when you showed the slide on the survey, interestingly, some of the written comments we've gotten and said that the survey didn't allow for full answers, or I'm paraphrasing here. But those looked like very clear and specific questions to me. But I did notice that there is a very clear differentiation between people who associate with the arts and people who associate with the crafts, and whether or not they support integration of the show. I don't know, this is more rhetorical than an actual question, but is that just a real fundamental divide here, that we have generally the arts side not wanting to integrate and crafts people wanting to integrate? And is that a driver here?
That has been a driver. In the past, the crafts members outnumbered the arts members by 2 to 1, or 2/3 of the show was crafts, 1/3 was arts. So we've seen increasing numbers. We actually have seen less opposition from arts, but through the survey, we did have a majority of arts members who did oppose it. I believe that since members participated, I think some of those have experienced that it's not a fundamental shift in the elimination of the show. It's trying to make it more vibrant down there. But historically, we have seen more arts participants opposing this. However, even at the committee level, both of the arts representatives did support integration, and that's the first time that that's happened. And this has come up several times over the last few decades.
Thanks. And then going back to the director's report and getting back up to, I guess, at 135, it being the number, are arts and crafts people coming back in roughly the same overall ratios, or is one coming back more strongly than the other?
I haven't studied that specifically, but from what I've seen on the numbers, I think they're proportional. We do have a few members who are still on the fence on coming back, although all, excuse me, fees resumed for all members as of September. We have an option for members that are not comfortable returning back out of concerns for Delta variant or other COVID concerns, that they can put themselves on a medical leave of absence, which is a paid leave of absence, but we make it easy. We don't require a doctor's note. That's usually a requirement for those. And that offer will extend through the end of December and may be extended if there's further developments. But right now we do have a few members, about 22 members or so, that are kind of in that category of placing their membership on hold. And I do have a mixture of both arts and crafts members who are in that situation.
Okay, thanks. And then one last question before make sure that no one else has any questions before opening it up. There's been a couple of the written comments come in that really are concerned about the changes to the code of conduct. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, and what the changes are and where the concerns might be?
The code of conduct for the Arts and Crafts show is quite a bit different than the code of conduct through the rest of the department. For instance, for the Arts and Crafts show, for a first event or offense, it doesn't matter how egregious the offense is, the maximum penalty can be a warning. Where the rest of the department has a system that we look at, okay, how egregious was that offense? What is an appropriate response to it? So throughout the rest of the Parks and Recreation Department, we use an enforcement procedure for code of conduct violations, which is quite a bit different than the advisory committee process that we've had in the past. We've looked at standardizing and aligning those two systems, and the committee through our meetings suggested kind of a hybrid, using the new Parks and Recreation Department Code of Conduct enforcement procedure as the template, but still allowing input from advisory committee on certain penalties and violations.
And Chair McGill, I would add to that, and Mr. Bryan correctly summarized. The difference is the other challenge is that sometimes these violations take place and the review process may not occur until the next scheduled meeting, which can be a month away. And depending on the egregiousness or the violation, some of those things need a much more rapid response. And I think the department has shown through all of our programs and services that we look at these things fairly. We want to make sure that participants, in this case, whether it's staff, show members, the public, their safety is highly prioritized. And so weaving in the department code of conduct with involvement from the committee will ensure that the show can continue to advance forward, but we can deal with those most egregious situations in a timely manner and make sure that everybody's safe.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, no, I was just surprised at sort of the energy around that, I guess. Vice Chair Clark.
What kind of violations and egregious behavior are we talking about?
They can vary from not following monitors' directives. We've had members who have been accused of pushing other members, someone slamming keys on someone's glass display out of frustration. There are a variety of violations that we may have. In the past, selling items that were not approved for that section. For instance, crafts in the art section, which these changes would kind of eliminate that. However, those are some examples of some code of conduct and some violations that we've had.
Chair Clark and Chair McGill, Commissioner Clark, and commissioners, I can give you the two major areas that we've spent a lot of time focusing on. We have a category for major violations, and that's described as confrontational behavior to staff or others, compromises to safety, damage to facility, repetitive minor occurrences, and failure to correct behavior after a verbal warning. And then for an extreme violation, we're talking about fighting, extremely confrontational behavior, breaking the law, harassment, or repetitive incidents. So we have an existing code of conduct that deals with minor, major, and extreme. It also has an appeal process, and it's also inside the scope and responsibilities of the Parks and Recreation Director. Our code of conduct very much mirrors the same code of conduct that's used by the Santa Barbara Public Library System. And it's a way to make sure that staff and participants are treated equally and fairly through the process when rules are not followed or behavior becomes extreme and needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I just add to that? The ones that I have seen over the years that have come to a commission level have started out as very small things that if they were dealt with when they began, and that's what I'm hearing today, they would not escalate to where we've seen ones with physical violence, damage to people's goods, and things that were really almost an embarrassment to other show members. So I support the idea that we would deal with those behaviors in a more quickly and have consequences.
And I agree with that. I wanted to make sure I understood.
So if someone is physically or verbally abusive during the show, what happens? Nothing unless a monitor sees it, or does the person being abused have to call a number or a park ranger? Like, what in the moment, what happens if that kind of situation is occurring? Just curious.
The process would be, if it's during the show, when the monitor's there, the monitor would get a phone call in all likelihood to report what was happening. And we have a complaint form that can be filled out with. If it's witnessed by the monitor directly fills out that complaint form. If otherwise, a show member can file a complaint form, and that's given to the office for review, for investigation, and then further action.
And in the old world or the current world, that would be at the next scheduled meeting of the committee, but now it's going in, your proposal would be to take it more into the regular Parks and Recreation procedures.
Yes.
With advisory committee consultation and support.
Yes, and there's some areas that are just so minor that they don't even get to this process. Say a member who just joined the show and they set up 1 foot beyond where they were supposed to set up, so in their neighbor's space. situation like that, the monitor or me as the supervisor will go in and say, oh, your boundary is here, you have to move. They immediately comply. That's not really a violation. That's just administering the show. It becomes a violation if they say, no, I'm not going to do that. I claim this is my space, and then we can go into a violation. That's just a very simplistic example. But that is part of what we do, is just administering the show, is looking at some minor things and getting people aligned with the procedures and regulations.
Okay.
And Chair McGill and commissioners, just to add on, yes, our monitors do call the park rangers. And when we get back to full staffing levels, that's a resource that we do have. Obviously, depending on the type of incident, there's nothing that precludes a show member from calling the Santa Barbara Police Department or 911 and getting an immediate response. Those types of responses or those types of calls are also all folded into the whole process of the code of conduct, because obviously a situation where the police or other law enforcement or law enforcing agencies are called to respond, it's certainly in some cases would be treated as an extreme violation, and then we would move through this process independent or in collaboration with whatever the police department report referenced.
Okay. Okay, I think this is probably, unless there are any additional questions right now, a good point to turn it to public comment and see if there is anybody from the public that wishes to speak on this item, and just recognizing that we're not, this is a for discussion item and not a decision item. Ms. Navarez, do we
Real
have?
quick, I just wanted to say, like, just Mr. Hannah and Mr. Bryan for future thought. In my place, if I work in the hospital, and when someone acts out of hand, there's a code of conduct, or there's imminent threat of harm to somebody, including verbal abuse, physical abuse, we call a best team. It's a best team. So it's a bunch of people from different departments that come to the floor and de-escalate the situation and talk to the person and make sure everyone's okay. I mean, you might want to run it by one of your ad hoc committee members. Do you guys want to form a team? Something happens, one of the members can call people on the team and they come and kind of do a, like, in the moment mediation witness thing. It might be something to explore. It works for us.
Thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, yeah, good. Do we have any raised hands, Ms. Navarez?
Chair McGill, we currently have 2 hands raised. I will call on them separately. They will have 2 minutes to speak. If you would like to speak on this item and have not raised your hand, please raise it now. We will hear from Mr. Jim Hawken. Mr. Hawken, I have unmuted you. Please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Chair McGill and commissioners, I'm concerned about allowing show members to machine print their work being inconsistent with the municipal code. The code states that all works exhibited must be individually hand produced. But Parks and Recreation has changed those words in its show rules to individually and personally produced. I'm concerned this word change is inconsistent with the code, and that 1508 chapter prohibits Parks and Recreation from promulgating rules that are inconsistent with that code. City Council carefully worded this restriction in 1974 to assure city residents that commerce being promoted on their public property would in essence be limited to original handmade artifacts, a concept understood in the art world throughout human history. This show has that unique quality, is publicized as such, and became famous for that. I fear that Parks and Recreation is using its revised rule to bypass the code restriction and allow manufactured publishing using machine printing where no handwork is used to apply ink or paint to individual items sold. I'm concerned that this is illegitimate, no matter whether members own their own printers or not. This would also allow craft members to 3D print their items. I'm concerned that all of this seriously compromises the assurance that City Council made to city residents. If change is necessary, one would think that legally city residents through the City Council would first have to change the wording of the code with no alternative wording and show rules, and that these changes would have to be in place before any of this machine manufacturing could take place in this arts and crafts show. Otherwise, city residents could see all of this as mismanagement of their public space, like when we almost lost the show in 1973 and 74. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins.
Okay, Chair McGill, our next speaker is Marilyn. I believe it's Marilyn Loperfido. Marilyn, I am unmuting you. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. There you go. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair McGill and commission members. It's always a little difficult for me to speak publicly, but I'd like you to know that I have 42 years of history with this show and also multiple terms serving on the elected committee. I've submitted a document to you, unfortunately could not get it in till just 3 p.m. We were not notified of this meeting until the end of last week. We haven't received any of the submissions that have been given today, but that's fine. And Jason and some of the there have been a lot of cutouts in this meeting. So what I hadn't planned on addressing, but I really have to bring up, is that somehow there is this focus and description given that we have egregious behavior and we have it all the time. We have maybe one incident a year, and the code of conduct suggested removes our ability to appeal with only a 3-week time limit, doesn't follow the one that we've carefully crafted over time. And things like monitors can make mistakes. The decisions of staff people are subjective. I really liked what Nicole said, is that we've stressed time and time again at these meetings, we're not into enforcement, we're into de-escalation. Please read the document that I submitted carefully, because it also outlines all of the problems we've been having at these meetings that have not been presented, and the 13 meetings that were dealt with very quickly. I don't speak well in public, but the document was carefully crafted that I sent you. I ask you all to please read it carefully, ask me any questions. Please, the meetings have been worse than anything I've ever seen. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry, I'm nervous, but there are very much problems with the code of conduct being imposed on us as opposed to the one that we use. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Loperfido. And I know that we have all received the document, and certainly I've already read it, and I think I can speak for those who haven't will do so shortly. I mean, we did just get it right before the meeting.
And everybody here has heard me unable to public speak for years, so it's don't feel bad about it.
Yeah, that's does not come naturally to pretty much anybody. Do we have any other raised hands?
Chair McGill, there are no other hands raised.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thank you for your comments. I would like now to open it up for questions and discussion. I mean, really, I'd say any feedback that we want to give to to Mr. Bryan and Mr. Hanna. There's no decision here at this point.
So can you just clarify for me briefly the changes? I know you've tried, but a little bit more succinctly. I'm so tired, I wasn't grasping it all. Really briefly, the changes to the code of conduct. The last speaker was saying they have 3 weeks to appeal. How is that different from the prior?
The code of conduct in the past had a very complex review system that goes through the advisory committee. They could play out through multiple hearings and take several months. And then at the end of the hearing, The appeals can be made to the Park and Recreation Commission, and then if they did not did not like that opinion, they could appeal directly to City Council, which is very unusual for code of conduct and violations in a park and recreation program. The standard code of conduct that we have throughout the rest of the department has a specific appeal process that goes directly to the Park and Recreation Director. So the system that we propose actually has it. Generally, they start at the staff level, reviewed by myself as the administrator of the show. The recreation manager would then make a recommendation based on the input that they receive. May have more questions and more investigation, and then it would go to the Park and Recreation Director, and the director's opinion can be appealed, but that's where it would end, where currently it can go all the way to City Council.
So the appeal process then would stop with us, is that?
Stop with the director, and that's consistent with what we use throughout the rest of the department. And there are times that I certainly try to do my best on de-escalating, and I look at the specifics of each violation, and there have been violations that have been suggested in the past and by the show monitor, and upon looking at the evidence, I've determined on some violations or some reports that no, this is not really a violation. I believe that this is something that can be mitigated by just explaining the rules or doing a studio inspection to ensure that a rule has not been broken. So it is certainly our efforts to, or our intention to try to de-escalate whenever possible, because it is a show where, you know, it's member to member. Advisory committee also expressed some concern and some discomfort being the person who's determining the penalty for someone who they're working right alongside with. And they actually like the ability for the department to step in a little bit more, makes it a faster process, where in the past it literally can go several months.
It's the arts. It's an interesting setup, because for some people this is their primary source of income, but they're not all working for the same company, but they're working in the same place, and there's no HR. So I think that makes it really hard. I'm not
And
getting any-
considering that we see very few issues that rise to a level of the commission, I would say. And those ones have been based, in my opinion, more on personality issues and people not getting along. And that had escalated. And what I would hope is that this process would take that, you know, where when it comes to a hearing, it's like, well, that's their friends, and, you know, people are lining up on either side, and it's not a very comfortable or neutral setting for people. So hopefully this would alleviate some of that.
I mean, that's why I guess I was surprised at the amount of time and energy that's gone into this, because it almost seemed disproportionate, which really made me wonder about it. Yeah. I agree.
Would have a
Process and making it more neutral makes a whole lot of sense.
I would have a few comments. The first thing I would say is change is hard on people. And it's a good sign to me that we have two people who have issues with this in two different areas. That is not a mandate of the Arts and Crafts Show. That is some very specific issues. And so I congratulate you on coming this far with it. The assignment system makes such good sense to me, and integrating the show, how you're integrating it where it isn't, you know, you're not just throwing it up in the air and seeing where it comes down, but the slow integration as spots open up of moving people in, I think is going to revitalize the show. And so I am quite supportive of that. The Prince idea, I understand what the gentleman said. And what I'm wondering about is, does this open art to more people? If you can buy a print the print was created by the artist, but maybe I can't afford a painting, but I can afford a print. And does this help the artist then to make a living? So those are some things that crossed my mind when I thought about prints. I'm no expert in it, but would it give more opportunities both to the creator and the customer in this one? The Arts and Crafts Show has to make some changes. The world has changed. And I think you're moving in the right direction. I think the beachfront also has to be opened up for other activities at some time. So I support the different levels of activities and the fact that we can, make it a vibrant waterfront with the Arts and Crafts Show, not without it. So those are some thoughts I had.
Okay. Before I weigh in, does anybody else want to comment before I do?
I have a similar sentiment with BB about the whole art print thing too. I think it does open up art to be attainable for people who maybe can't afford original prints, or even for a really beautiful piece that there was only one of. I mean, you can't see behind me, but I have original art on the wall. The owl's about to land on my head. There's two of them. I bought, and there's a print over on that wall by the same artist of it's really beautiful, but she only made one. She sold it, but she sold prints. So the fact that I could buy a print didn't mean I was only going to buy prints and not purchase original art. That's my thoughts about the prints. The code of conduct things I need more time to think about. I'm not willing to put forth an opinion right now, but I like the direction it's going in.
Question. So when we talk about prints, are we talking about prints by the same artist who's exhibiting, or are we talking about prints from a different painting when the artist who's not at the show?
Chair McGill and Commissioner Lexner Buxton, it would always require the artwork to be made by that individual person. That is a tenet of the show, is when you're shopping there, you're talking to the person who created that particular item, whether it is a piece of jewelry, a piece of pottery, photography, or in this case, proposed to be a print of an original piece of art that one person created. So we're not opening up to just sell prints of anything. It would certainly be prints that are created by that one individual artist.
Thank you. And as a person who can afford art based on his income, I would really prints are wonderful. I've been given some great prints over the years, and I agree with the rest of the commission. I think in saying that they're often more accessible.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm basically agreeing with everything that I'm hearing. I think it's probably just for completion's sake worth having someone look at the ordinance language of hand produced versus what you've got in it. I can't remember the exact word now. Just to make sure that there's not a catch there. And then in looking at that, then looking at the difference between photography and a print from a painting or a fine art print. I would say it's worth dotting the I's and crossing the T's on that one and that language. I think change is necessary. I really strongly agree with everything that Commissioner Longstreet said, and the show can and should, needs to coexist with other activities on the waterfront. I mean, there is one request that's come through to study everything more and work through all possible scenarios. I think at some point deadlines are good and things just need to get done and we need to move on. I think by the time January 2022 rolls around, this will have been basically a year in the making. And yes, it's been an unusual year, but it has been a year in the making, and that seems like enough time to have worked through this. So I support the timeline that you're following, and I support the work you're doing. And I think it's going to be, I think at the end of the day, it's going to be really good for the show, and it's going to be good for Santa Barbara.
Thank you for your input and suggestions.
Is there anything else before we close this item? All right. Well, thank you both, Mr. Bryan and Mr. Hanna. Thank you very much for your work. Look forward to seeing this next time around. And with that, do we have any new business? I don't think we do. Okay, I'm taking that as silence is no. And with Ms. LeBlanc, no?
No.
You're muted, but I understood. Okay, with that then, I will adjourn the meeting and thank you very much, and we will see you all in a month.